Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you hired a personal chef. You pay him every single day, whether he cooks or not. Some days he burns the food, some days he doesn't show up. And at the end of the year, you find out a vending machine down the street consistently outperformed his cooking at a fraction of the cost. That's actively managed mutual funds, and Americans have $17 trillion sitting in them right now. This is the story of the most expensive underperformance in financial history. And the worst part? It's completely legal. It's hiding inside your 401k, and the people running the scheme aren't villains in a Netflix documentary. They're wearing fleece vests and handing out branded water bottles at financial wellness seminars. Let's start with how we got here. For most of the 20th century, if you wanted to invest in the stock market, you needed someone to do it for you. Enter the actively managed mutual fund. The idea was simple. Hire a team of brilliant analysts, give them Bloomberg terminals and enough caffeine to power a small city, and let them hand-pick stocks that would beat the market. And in return, you pay them a small fee for this privilege. Sounds reasonable. Sounds like a fair deal. It wasn't. Because here's what the data actually shows. Over a 20-year period, roughly 90% of actively managed large-cap funds underperform the S&P 500. Not some of the time, not during bad years, consistently, reliably, almost poetically. 9 out of 10 of these funds, staffed with Ivy League graduates who wake up thinking about earnings multiples, cannot beat an index that requires zero human involvement, zero decisions, zero Bloomberg terminals, just a fund that says yes to every stock in the S&P 500 and calls it a day. And yet, here's where it gets genuinely infuriating. Despite consistently underperforming, actively managed funds are still charging you for the privilege of losing. The average expense ratio on an actively managed fund sits around 0.68%. Let's say you invest $50,000 into a mutual fund for 30 years. The market averages 7% annually. With an index fund charging 0.03% in fees, you'd end up with roughly $370,000. With an actively managed fund charging 0.68%, you'd end up with around $310,000. That's $60,000 in fees quietly leaving your account in exchange for consistently worse performance. You didn't just pay for mediocrity. You paid a premium for it. And this is where the financial services industry reveals its entire hand. Because mutual fund companies don't just profit when your investments do well. They profit on the total amount of money they manage, which is called assets under management, or AUM, which means whether your fund goes up or down, whether your retirement grows or shrinks, the fee machine never stops. The meter is always running. Rain or shine, bull or bear, your fund manager's salary is not affected by your returns, only by how much money he can convince you to keep parked with him. It's the financial equivalent of a personal trainer who gets paid regardless of whether you lose weight, and who, by the way, has been putting on weight himself for the last decade. Now you might be thinking, okay, but surely some of these managers beat the market. And yes, some do. Every year there are active fund managers who outperform. But here's the catch nobody talks about. Past performance doesn't predict future performance. The managers who beat the market in year one are essentially random. A study by S&P found that of the funds that ranked in the top quartile of performance in 2020, fewer than 10% managed to stay in the top quartile by 2022. The hot hand isn't real. The genius was largely timing and luck dressed up in a well-tailored suit. So how has this industry survived? How does a product that demonstrably underperforms at scale continue to pull in trillions of dollars from regular people? And the answer is the same answer it always is when you're wondering how something broken keeps working. Complexity, confusion, and distribution. Because most Americans don't choose their mutual funds. Their employer does. Your 401k plan comes preloaded with a menu of options selected by your HR department, often with zero transparency into why those specific funds were chosen and zero disclosure about what relationships existed between your company and the fund family on that menu. And the people most harmed aren't wealthy investors who have access to advisors and alternatives. It's middle-class workers who have been told their entire lives to just max out the 401k and trust the process. People who are doing everything right and still getting quietly taxed by an industry that profits off their loyalty and their confusion. Now the good news is this problem has a solution, and the solution is boring. It's embarrassingly boring. It's index funds. Low-cost, passive, set-it-and-forget-it index funds. A total market index fund from Vanguard charges 0.03% annually. That's 3 cents for every $100 invested. Warren Buffett, the man who has beaten the market for 6 decades, has said publicly that when he dies, 90% of the money left to his wife should go into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. Not a hedge fund, not a mutual fund, a simple, boring index fund. The best investment strategy in the world isn't one that requires a genius. It's one that requires patience. But here's the real gut punch at the end of all this. The people selling you actively managed funds know this. The research is not hidden. The underperformance data is publicly available. And the industry continues anyway because the incentives are perfectly misaligned.
Your advisor earns more when you're in higher fee products. The fund manager earns more as AUM grows, not as performance improves. And your 401k administrator earns relationship fees from the fund families on your menu. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed, just not for you. So next time someone in a fleece vest hands you a fund prospectus and tells you their team has a disciplined, research-driven approach to generate alpha, just remember, the vending machine down the street is beating them, and it's doing it for free.